Hi, my name's Lisa Snell, and I'm the Education Director at the Reason Foundation. And tonight we are here for our National School Choice Week celebration. And it is for National School Choice Week, which runs January 25th through the 31st. And we're going to have a discussion tonight about a very important legal case in California called the Vergara decision. And joining me tonight is a very distinguished panel of California experts, advocates, and plaintiffs in the case. First, I have Bill Evers, who works at the Hoover Institute at Stanford, and he has a long history in education reform. In the middle, I have Joe and Julia Macias. How do you say your last name? I'm sorry. Macias. And Marshall Tuck, who recently ran for state superintendent and is a longtime advocate for education reform in California. He worked on school startups in Los Angeles Unified and in charter schools. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I'm going to start actually with Julia, because I think that Julia is the star of this show, absolutely. So Julia, you were a plaintiff in the Vergara case, which I'm actually going to have you just tell us succinctly what that meant to you and what you think the Vergara case was about, just for our panel.
Well, the Vergara case was about making sure every student's voice is heard, because every student has or deserves the right to a great education, leading to a great success.
Okay, great, thank you. And Joe, can you tell us as her dad and from a parent's perspective, you know, the Vergara case actually went over 5 laws, right? But in practice, would you tell us a little bit about what statutes the Vergara case took on, and then also personally, what kind of effect it had on you as a parent and your family?
Well, the Vergara case was important to us because Julia was affected by all statutes. She was able. We saw great teachers get dismissed because of the LIFO. We've seen teachers who have permanent employment, even though they're grossly ineffective teachers. So for us, this case signifies a lot because we're given a voice, and I think it creates awareness of the current situation in our school system.
Great, thanks. Now, Marshall, at the time that this case was going forward, you actually were acting as a spokesperson to become the new state superintendent and to move the state toward an education reform agenda. Do you mind telling us, what do you think the implications of this will be, and what do you think will actually happen moving forward? Now, we have a court decision. Obviously, it's being appealed, but what comes next, or what, in your vision is likely to happen in the state of California around these laws?
Yeah, I think the case is a huge case, and first I want to thank Julia and Joe and Evelyn for really being pioneers and leading on this. These statutes that say that a teacher gets tenure in less than 2 years, that all layoffs are done based only on seniority, not based on performance, that it's virtually impossible to remove highly ineffective teachers. They've been around for a real long time. And people have known for a real long time that they are not good for kids. But it took courageous Julia and Joe and Evelyn to fight for those rights, to finally push this issue forward. And I just think it's such an important and monumental work, and just a wonderful act of courage. I've been so happy to get to know you all during this process. And I think what it means for our state is that we're not moving backwards on the issue of what are the best policies for kids. And these are policies that we know have been highly detrimental, particularly to our highest poverty children, because these policies actually lead to a situation where you have larger numbers of grossly ineffective teachers in front of often our most challenging students that have the greatest need. And you also have a situation where you have some highly effective teachers who've been let go, and oftentimes from schools. And in my experience running a number of schools up and down the state, here in Los Angeles, was we had some wonderful teachers that came to schools in Watts and in East LA that we had to let go because of the laws that say last in, first out. And what's been fun up and down the state has been just talking to people in the public, and we're moving forward. And I think what you're going to see come out of the Vergara case are policies that are good for teachers in terms of making sure that we are supporting teachers, making sure that we're lifting teachers up, but most importantly are really good for kids, so we don't have policies. And we'll see an appellate court that's hopefully going to uphold this law, and then the legislature will be the ones that decide what comes next in the law. But I think what you'll see is longer tenure policies where layoffs are based on performance, not on seniority, and also a dismissal process that's much more rational. So if you have grossly ineffective employees, teachers, principals, or otherwise, that they're able to be removed quickly rather than have kids and young people feel the negative impacts of that, which is just absolutely and positively unacceptable in our state.
Bill, I wanted to ask you from like a larger worldview perspective, you know, one of the criticisms has been about Vergara, about teachers being judged based on test scores. And I wonder if you would talk a little bit about the national trend. Like, is it the case now anywhere in the country that test scores are the sole way that teachers are judged? Or, you know, the Obama administration has done a lot of work around teacher performance. You know, what is that trend, and what do you think likely is the reality for evaluating teachers in the United States moving forward, and how does that relate to the Vergara case?
Well, there's no state where the sole judgment is the test score, and certainly not 1 year test score. But I don't think we want to push test scores out of the picture. If they're a rolling accumulation of a number of years experience of the teacher with classes over several years, we get a pretty accurate picture of whether that teacher is delivering a year's worth of learning to the child in a year. So that if we look at what could help a child succeed, if that child gets 3 years in a row of underperforming teachers in terms of their success in getting the children to learn, that can be the end of their school achievement, essentially. They could be ruined for life. And this is a horrible thing to impose on anybody. And the children from racial minorities or from low incomes are often in schools where there are high concentrations of these underperforming teachers. And this is just a crime to impose that on those families and those children. So you could overemphasize testing, you could use bad tests, but I think it would be a mistake if you have fairly good tests and you looked at across several years to somehow let the teachers, you have only a subjective judgment of somebody, be the basis of it. Testing should be part of it.
Okay, thanks, Bill. So here's the thing, like, Marshall, you've worked in schools and you've had your family in schools, and Bill, you have a lot of experience with schools, so I'm just throwing this out here for the panel. Is it the case that we actually, in a lot of cases, need tests to know who the low performers are? So when I look through the slides about the Vergara case, a lot of the poor performance was not planning lessons, absenteeism, disorganization. Like, there already seemed to be a lot of evidence. And, you know, I have 2 kids in school. My son just graduated from high school, and my daughter's a junior. In my experience, the principal, the parents, the kids, like, maybe there's some teachers in the middle that could go either way, but the teachers that people are unsatisfied with, it's like an open secret. Like, no one needs to wait even for a test score to tell them that, because there's other kinds of competence and behavior that, so Joe, how about you guys talk about the case that you mentioned in the video, right? Like, to have a teacher tell you when your child is in 2nd grade that they'll never be able to do math again. I mean, that's an indicator that, you know, you don't need a test to tell you that. It's your personal interaction with the teacher. So in a way, it's almost like test scores are a straw man, because it's not like in schools people don't have an indication already of who might be their low performers, and maybe tests would confirm that. But so Joe, you want to talk a little bit about your personal experience with that?
Well, I think I believe that test scores are an indicator where your student, you know, of the student level of achievement or understanding in that subject matter. So they serve as a guide. I also feel that, you know, test scores serve as a benchmark for the teacher to see how effective they are teaching within the classroom. And for me as a parent who is not there in the classroom, I do see these test scores as an indicator of how well my daughter is doing in the classroom and in the school. So definitely, I'm a strong believer in test scores.
I think if you consider the fact that my friend Rick Hanushek, who's an economist who studies education, has said that if we could move to some other occupation, the 5% lowest performing teachers in our public schools, and put in average teachers in their place, the United States would be the top performing country in the world. Now, part of the problem is many people feel the political heat of firing somebody. And so as you saw in the video, the numbers are minuscule. It's like no other profession. Imagine GE, Jack Welch used to say, I fire 5% of the people every year who are the lowest performers. Think, and Hanushek is not talking about every year. He's just saying one time firing the lowest. So in regular life, people are fired all the time. And it's healthy. They go on to something better, and the entity does a better job. So we are sacrificing the future of our children for these adults who have these protected positions. It's not fair. It's not decent for these children. These adults could do something better and more productive.
Lisa, if I could just mention two things based on what you said. One, I think far too often the conversation around data and testing goes right to using the data to remove poor performing teachers, where the reality is you want the data to actually help teachers get better at their jobs, and you want the data to be able to identify what teachers are doing very well so you can learn from them and share those best practices. Without actually having information, you're not able to actually identify what's working well. And frankly, if you don't have feedback as a professional, teacher, principal, regardless of what your role is, you can't actually get better. And so I think it's something that having good information on how students are achieving is the anchor of helping a staff improve as fast as possible. The second thing I will mention, to the point of why you do need some kind of third-party information, is there are actually a lot of principals that aren't very effective. We took over the lowest performing schools in Los Angeles, and it was amazing. I talked to teachers who hadn't had a principal in their classroom in 2 years. It's at some of these schools. So you can't just assume that a principal is going to be able to make the right decisions. I mean, certainly a high quality principal will, but unfortunately, in particular in our high poverty neighborhoods, you don't have that as well. And so we have a lot of issues that need to be addressed in order to be able to make sure that every child like Julia is getting a high quality education, which is their right and is what is essential for our state.
So to follow up on that, Marshall, in a lot of newer charter schools now, they actually are using data so much more often so that they have almost a competency-based learning, so that the data is what tells them that students are mastering material, and it's not punitive. It's a way to move the class forward. It's a way to individualize instruction for each child. I mean, data in a lot of ways in these new models is our friend, right? And can you talk a little bit about kind of the trends in blended learning or different kinds of schools that use data?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's exciting when you think about the future of when you kind of combine a teacher who's supported, who is given time for professional development, who believes in their kids, with wonderful kids who want to learn, and then leveraging technology to really allow you to be able to identify the unique needs of each child. I mean, schools are complicated, but they're pretty simple. It's a person in front of a classroom trying to understand what inspires the 30 children in front of me. How does each child actually learn individually? What are the unique strengths of those children? What are areas where they come up short, where they need additional support? That's really the job, and that's actually why it's so hard. So what's nice about using technology and data and information, it really allows a teacher to have such a better understanding of where their students are at. It allows you to actually have a class of 30 kids who may be quite different levels with quite different learning styles, and break them into much smaller groups so they're able to move forward. And example in our schools, we took over when I was at the Partnership for LA Schools, Ritter Elementary School in Watts, and this was the lowest performing elementary school in all of LA, and we took it over. We worked with a math program, ST Math. It's a great visual math program, and you walk into a kindergarten classroom, Every child is on a computer. The teacher's walking around as a coach, working with each child individually. The screens are very different because the kids are at actually different levels, and you're seeing young people just learning math and falling in love with it at a very young age. And you can track it also. They're at home, morning, weekends, the amount of time they're actually spending on this subject because it's fun. It's kind of game-based mathematics, and you're really able to understand each child's where they're at. And also, again, for helping our teachers and principals and counselors get better at their jobs, the data helps them reflect and learn and grow. And so I think that you're going to see over the next 5 years and 10 years just a wonderful advancement. The scary part, I think, for the collective state and country is you're seeing some schools now really embracing change and technology, while a majority of schools, particularly in high poverty neighborhoods, are not. And if we don't get our act together soon and make sure that all schools are moving forward, we're going to see an achievement gap get wider than it's ever been before, because you're seeing some schools really embrace what does it take for a high quality teacher in every classroom? How do we really engage and leverage technology? How do we make sure teachers are supported, have enough time for professional development, and other schools aren't? And that's going to be scary if we don't get our act together. The good news is we will. But we have to get serious about moving, because change is coming in schools fast. We have to make sure it's coming in all schools, in all neighborhoods, for all kids.
Great. So I'm going to ask Bill a little bit about the implications of the Vergara decision for the rest of the country. And then, Joe and Julia, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about how you've chosen schools for your girls and for your family, and how you picked the school you go to, and what is the importance of school choice for you, your family. So Bill, you want to talk a little bit about what do you think comes next, or what is the significance of this decision that takes on these teacher rules, these work rules?
So I would first add, though, something about the value of technology, and that also is that parents can learn more about what's going on with their child. So if you think earlier days, you got a report card maybe every semester. You can communicate in much closer to real time with the parents. You can have a much more meaningful parent-teacher conference with, here's what to watch for in the homework, and here's what to make sure the child, anything you can do to support your child at home in getting this topic down solidly. So the central question here is, what does this mean nationally, this decision in California? And I think it's extremely important, because the basic problems where teachers get tenure too early, instead of 3 to 5 years, as say Arnold Schwarzenegger tried to do in California. And even though these unions apparently privately acknowledged in this lawsuit that, that actually makes sense, they fought like crazy against this much more logical thing when it was on the ballot in California. But anyway, so it should be, if you're going to have tenure, it should be a longer time to see if the teacher is really prepared to do this as their profession. If you're going to be in a position of needing to fire ineffective teachers, not just teachers that embezzle from the funds of the school or something like that, which even so could take 3 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you're going to do it, though, they didn't give them a year's worth of learning in a year. Or maybe they lost significantly progress somehow. This happens, and when the school is facing layoffs, if it's done on the basis of seniority, if it's done on the basis of last in, first out, you're going to lose immensely talented teachers, many of which may have had training in the latest things, such as how to use technology effectively. You're going to lose those people. So you have the same problem all over the country, and that's why the video lists all these states. Now in New York, it's going to get a lot more attention, because we have the former CNN television personality, Campbell Brown, heading up the effort to fight this in New York State. And so we're going to see this in a number of states, but because major news media are based in New York, and because it's a huge state, and this will be a battle of the titans in New York. And so California has really led the way. The plaintiffs have led the way, the whole family. And so I think it's of course of great symbolic importance to the morale of the school reform movement, but it's of immense practical importance going forward. If the chance for learning can get liberated, if the opportunity for learning can get liberated so that we can get people who are ineffective as teachers to go into other fields and stop holding back kids who could be advancing, who could be achieving their potential.
Great. Thanks so much, Bill. So Julia, tell me a little bit about where you go to school now and how you got there. Did your family choose that school, and what does that choice mean to you?
Well, I'm currently attending a magnet school focusing on, literature and like global social institutions, etc. And my parents did help me through the way, through my education, helping me to get to where I am now, my level of education overall, and definitely my parents have been a really big role, and they've advocated for me like a long part of through the entire journey, and it's just been they're really inspiring, and they definitely do play a big role in my education, which is why they have helped me to get to where I am today.
Thank you. And Joe, you want to talk a little bit about how you chose schools for your kiddos?
Yes, and interesting you should bring up school choice because doing advocacy for education reform for us as a family has been in the making, for the past over 10 years. And I think to really be able to implement that into looking out for our kids and make sure that they get the best education possible is especially important. Now, one recommendation that that I do want to give is for parents to really be involved and visit the schools, talk to the principals, talk to other parents who've had kids there. That's how we get to find out the ins and the outs of the schools, and also discuss these findings with your kids. Julia selected the school because she had a choice of going to 3 different schools, and what are her interests, and that helped us as a guide to selecting the right school for her, and also what are her long-term goals. In her case, she wants to go to Harvard or MIT, and how are we going to get her there? Are these teachers going to prepare her and get her ready for those schools? And so we have to do extra research as parents and be more aware of the things that are taking place in the schools by getting involved in the parents groups, and as well as keeping up with the grades and asking those questions to the teachers. So for us, school choice has been important, and we're glad that we have it here, and we hope that this case helps us with more school choice, because I don't want to be afraid of next year that my daughter will be in a classroom with an ineffective teacher that is not going to prepare her to get her into the college of her choice.
So could I add something to this? I completely agree with you that a parent who wants success for his child or her child has to do this extra effort. But actually, we should look forward to a world where it doesn't have to be like a full-time occupation of a parent to try to navigate the school system. It should be easier to pick to have consumer reports of education and things like that, and you could choose a variety of pluralism of options that were more readily available. You didn't have to be spending all your time learning how to navigate this bureaucracy. It's instead like other things, other services that you obtain in life, and it's fairly easy. It still doesn't mean you shouldn't put effort into it, but it doesn't have to consume your life. And I completely agree that the teacher of all the different things that affect the success of a child, the teacher is so. My wife is here in the audience, Anna Bryson, and she was on school board in Southern California for 8 years, and that district made a huge effort to get high quality teachers and to nudge out teachers that were not being successful. But not every district does that. It is a dangerous, tricky thing to do, and it's politically volatile. And one of the reasons the tests are there, in a sense, is that if they do have the intestinal fortitude to fire a teacher, and it then gets to a lawsuit, they can point to the test and they can say, look, this teacher was not succeeding with the students, and it's not just somebody's opinion. here's the hard evidence. So that's something that can be turned back to.
Absolutely. Marshall, to kind of wrap things up, will you tell us a little bit about the parent revolution, the parent trigger, some of the parent groups? Like, what are things that parents can do right now in California and LA to get involved? What have been some of the successes of these efforts of parents to get more choices and to change the quality of their schools?
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of, to Bill's point, what do you want a parent to be able to do? You want a parent to be able to, I have a 3.5-year-old son, so my wife and I are starting to talk about his kindergarten, and he's in preschool right now, and I want to know, what are all the schools in my neighborhood? How are those schools doing? If there are issues, who can we follow up with? I want to have choice, and I want to be a part of it. I want to do my part. I have a responsibility as a parent. It's not just the school. I have a responsibility. And then also I want to make sure we can hold schools accountable so we can all learn together and make sure that there's a wonderful place for my son to be loved and cared for, and so he can learn and grow into whoever he's going to grow into. And unfortunately, that doesn't exist, and it particularly in our state doesn't exist for families where parents are less educated, and typically doesn't exist for many families that are in the most impoverished neighborhoods, and that has to change. And what's nice is you are seeing more and more opportunities and more groups and more policy that's giving parents real power in the equation. So one law that was passed called the Parent Empowerment Act, which the Parent Revolution is a group that helped pass that, and it was former Senator Romero pushed the bill through, and it basically said that if a school is failing and parents are frustrated, then if 50% of those parents actually sign a petition, they can change that school and force it to be reconstituted, force it to become a charter. And it was the first time that you actually saw real power put in the hands of parents. The other thing, which is wonderful, is you have charter school options where parents can, and for the first time, to me the beauty of, there's a lot of things that are beautiful about charter schools, but what I love the most is that it actually for the first time gave families of poverty choice, which frankly upper middle class and upper class has always had. Upper class choice is private school, live in a neighborhood with good public schools, and high poverty families never had that. I think as Bill mentioned, the key is what you want to see school districts in the state move forward on is make sure that parents know in a simple, digestible, easy way, easily accessible for all classes, all education levels, what are all of my school options, how are those schools doing, and how do I help find the right match for my child? And then you do see other organizations, the Partnership for LA Schools, which I used to lead, we ran a parent college on Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Our schools were all in the highest poverty neighborhoods of LA, where we taught our parents two things. We had an academic track and an empowerment track. One was how to be better parents for your children's education, because a lot of parents just didn't know how to do that because they were at low education levels, new to this country, et cetera. And second was our empowerment track. What are your rights as a parent? And how do you push this system to drive change? And the last thing I'll say, which is always critical, and it's very relevant coming out of my experience from a couple months ago, is parents have to vote. Because parents are the natural counterbalance to special interests in education. They are the natural counterbalance with a vested interest. And if we do not vote for the school board, if we do not vote for the legislature, if we don't vote for the state superintendent, we will have the same situation today from a policy perspective, tomorrow that we have today. But if we actually step up, exercise our rights with our kids directly, but then also make sure all of us, even if we're not parents today of children in school, we got to take care of other people's children because they're all our children. Get active politically to make sure these things happen, and then support the legal channel, which Vergara was just wonderful at because politics wasn't working as well, to drive as much change. That's a very simple question. What is the best policy for children? If this was my child, what would I want for that child? That's what we need to move forward on. And the nice part is there's more avenues for parents to do that today.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to add something about the parent power through Parent Revolution and through the trigger laws, the parent trigger laws. And this is a sort of an analytic point that not everybody realizes. But if you normally are a parent and you try to set a charter school up, you might be put in a lottery. And even if you did tons of work for getting the charter created, your own child might not be able to be in it. But the thing that happens with the parent trigger is you are getting together with all these other parents and you know that you will be part of it. So you have the motivation to do effective work to help your child because you know once you get to this threshold, your kid's going to get the benefit. and you don't the other way. So it leads you to maybe sit back and let somebody else do it and hope you win the lottery, but it doesn't motivate you to participate. And this is a way that motivates you to work for your child's success.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to say one reason that Vergara is so personally important to the work that I do, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. So at the Reason Foundation, we're getting ready to launch a new school choice center called the Center for School Funding Portability. And it's going to focus on all kinds of school choice, but one of the areas that there's less research on is the idea that students should have their per pupil funding from the local, state, and federal in a backpack that goes to the school that they enroll in. And that's what happens with charter schools. I mean, it's not as much money in the backpack as a traditional public school, but if you enroll in a charter school, the funding follows you to that school, and it goes directly to the school. But in regular public schools that are run by school districts, there's a lot of money chopped up off the top before that money follows you to the school, and there's a lot of rules attached to that money. So most school districts in the United States give principals staff, so you get so many adults for so many kids. They have a lot of rules about who you hire and how, and the individual principal doesn't necessarily get access to the budget. So the reason that Vergara is important is right now there's about 20 school districts around the country that have student-based budgeting or student-based allocation where all the public schools compete for the public dollars and they have open enrollment and the money actually does follow the kids to the school and a principal gets to make a decision. But what they don't have, so they have autonomy over the money, but then they still have to follow all of these rules. So if I'm a principal and I get control of 80% of my budget, but somebody tells me that when we have to do layoffs at the district, I have to get rid of these teachers first, or they tell me that I have forced placement and I have to take this teacher, or that I have to follow these tenure rules and give permanent employment to teachers I know that aren't ready for that, it doesn't do me very much good to have control of my budget or to have school choice if I still have to follow all of these legal rules about who I can hire. So Vergara is very, very significant to the student-based budgeting move, and there's a lot of districts that have done this, like Boston and Baltimore, and LA Unified actually has 100 schools that are funded this way. It's not as robust as some other places, but they try. But around the country, we're really moving toward, largely because of the 6,500 charter schools that are funded this way. They put a lot of pressure on traditional districts to give their principals the money and the autonomy. And I can guarantee you, without the 6,500 charter schools, there wouldn't be a district in America that would give any principals any more autonomy. They'd still tell them exactly what to do. But so for the work that we're doing moving forward, a piece of giving more school choice, more autonomy is relaxing the rules that the Vergara case relaxed. And so thank you so much for being a plaintiff in the case, Julia, and for all the work, because it's going to make the work that we do here at the Reason Foundation and help us to move forward policies that will give kids more school choice and higher quality teachers. And now we will take any questions that you guys have. Can I ask you to, I think I'll repeat the question, so if you can talk loudly, but then I'll just repeat it so that we can get it for the panel. Please.
Yes, I'd like to ask the panelists whether they believe it is time to do another initiative, because even though this fabulous victory is wonderful, but it can be reversed for who knows what reason.
Okay.
The last initiative that Arnold put out, the teachers union spent $100 million to defeat it. They didn't argue the merits because they couldn't. There's no merit, there's no positive argument that the reason should be as tenure is so short. So they argued against Arnold.
Okay.
It's been a very bad light. They couldn't do that this time because Brown is governor. So I wonder if this is the time to mount that again.
Okay, so the question is, could we at this time have another initiative, so as a large state vote, right, on the rules in this case? So about tenure, LIFO, all of these different rules that the Vergara case took on. So let's start with Joe. Any thoughts about that? Do you think that that might work, or?
I particularly like the process we're taking now, because this process really makes each individual look at what has been decided at the lower courts, and there isn't any money swaying one way or another, but just the actual facts of what this case was about. So for me, it would be more important to create awareness and the importance of these statutes that are in place and how this case would make it better in the sense for the schools or for those principals that run those schools, as opposed to an initiative.
Okay, great, thanks. And Marshall?
Yeah, my thought politically is that there's an appellate court case, ruling coming this summer, and I think that it's a better chance of getting these laws passed to let that play out. Hopefully that actually they continue to support the law. And then I think the legislature doesn't, if they try to kind of backdoor a deal to get around it, just make it a little bit better, then I think that you're in a better place from an earned media and an outrage perspective to after this process plays out, if they still don't fix the laws, to run an initiative, probably like in a 2018 timeframe, because you'd have a case where courts support it. Maybe the legislature doesn't do the right work and tries to kind of get around by passing laws that are mildly better but not substantially better. Then I think you'd see even more outrage publicly and probably increase the chances of winning versus running the initiative before the court case is played out. I think that just from a political perspective, let the court case play out, and then if there's a pushback, if we don't get there, I hope we get there. I think that hopefully the governor will lead us there, but if we don't get there, I think we're in a better position to actually win an initiative after, is my sense, just from a straight political calculation.
I would agree with Marshall. I do think it's helpful, though, to do things not just through the courts, but through other methods like the legislature, which is very impossible right now, but also other things that are the referendum and plebiscitary things, because it engages people, and they have to learn a little bit about it in order to help make decisions. I would add to your thing about portability that the governor, in a sense, legitimized this with his funding formula, but he bowed to the unions on having the money go to the central headquarters and not be truly in a backpack, as my wife used to say in the campaign that she ran earlier last year, and that this was a sort of a robbery for these children, and that they did then put in some bureaucracy of you have to report back after you maybe misspent all the money what fake categories you did to end up supporting the status quo. So it's not really a backpack, and that's what you're pushing for, and I think that is a truly noble endeavor.
The backpack has to go to the school level to be like charter schools. It is a public school charter school model.
It can't just be the district headquarters.
Okay, I see a question in the back.
Yeah, I'm Richard. I'm a teacher, and I have tenure. I'm taught for 37 years. And I want to salute the parents, because obviously we'd be much better off if every parent was like you and had the time, effort, skills to advocate for the child, because that's your main function. You should be advocating for your child, doing everything you can for them. So I salute you and your daughter for doing that. That's your role, and that's great. But not every parent has either the resources or the access or the time, because they're working 2 jobs or whatever, to be that advocate. So that's one issue we're facing in public education. Parents need to get more support to be involved. So I agree. More supportive parents like you, that would be one of the solutions to some of the problems. But as someone who has tenure, permanency, took me 3 years when I got permanency at that time, just means that I can advocate for students without fear of one day my principal saying, you're out of here. And that's one thing that giving me a permanent position, it's not a lifetime position. For me, it's been a lifetime because I love doing it. I'm retiring this year after 37 years. I've taught in low poverty areas, special ed students, and having a permanent position allows you to speak up and advocate for children and not just go along with everything that's passed down the pike, because a lot of stuff comes along that you're directed to do, and you can speak up when you have a permanent position, just like you can in any job. So I don't hear people talk about the poverty we face. One of my first classes, every student in the 3rd grade class went to the 1st grade level. Coming to school, they were unprepared. We don't give universal child care. There's lots of things facing, and I feel like this, when you're talking, you use a lot of loaded words and painting a brush over all these teachers that are incompetent. Not every teacher is going to reach your daughter. Doesn't mean they're incompetent. Every teacher can reach different people at different times, and I'm all for improving education. I just don't know that what you're advocating, getting rid of seniority, tenure, changing tenure, Listen, I have no problem. Make it 3 years, make it 5 years, make it 7 years. You need good administrators in there who have the time to go and look at the children. Because I agree with somebody saying here, that principal should be in classrooms all the time. But the reality is, a lot of these elementary schools, especially, they have one principal who has 1,000 things to do and can't make it. It should not be a surprise to see a principal in your classroom. They should be there. They should know what's going on. I agree with all this. So a lot of the stuff you're saying I agree with, but I don't know that what you're taking on is going to make that change. Because as permanent, we need
Okay, I'm going to stop you there.
You're concerned about poverty and other factors. There are other factors besides teachers.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'm going to let the panel respond to that. Bill?
You make a lot of excellent points. It would be much better if all parents were involved in a great way, but you also pointed out many times they have a personal situation with how much income they have to put together. Maybe two people are working and so forth. So that's an excellent point. But I think it's sort of like a doctor. A doctor has a patient, and the patient might be a child whose parents are not spending enough time with that child on nutrition or whatever. Whatever it is, the child has problems. The doctor takes the patient as he finds the patient. And his job or her job is to get a well child. And your job, all of us in the noble profession of teaching, I have taught college myself, is to advance the learning of these children, to help them fulfill their potential. They have to put in some effort too. So I think, it's important to realize the difficulties, but not to paralyze us and say, gosh, we can't get anywhere with these kids because they come from low-income households. And sometimes, this is the danger of the tyranny of low expectations. People give up on children. They sort of throw in the towel. We can't have that. We need a dynamic system that's encouraging everybody, the child, the parent, the teacher, the administrator, to get everybody moving upward.
Marshall or Joe?
Well, first of all, this case is not against teachers. I think we don't want to remove tenure. We're only questioning how tenure is obtained, whether the time that teachers get tenured is the right amount of time to get someone in there. Like you mentioned, you've been teaching for 37 years, and we are for teachers. I mean, our school system has some of the greatest teachers, and what this case is about is addressing those grossly ineffective teachers that exist in our district. And I think the teachers know it, the parents know it, the principals know it, but their arms are tied in terms of how to address it. And the current law that we have on how they address them, you saw the statistics. Out of 275,000 students, teachers, only 2 teachers get removed for not doing their job. And I know there are more.
What other field of work is like that? Nothing.
So I feel that this case starts addressing that and makes us talk about it, because by doing so, we'll have better students that have better success in life, and we'll have better teachers in our school system that are there, that want to be there, as opposed to just being there and relying on our statutes to, in a sense, to protect them against any type of evaluations.
Thank you.
One more thing to broaden, because I want to clarify. Certainly, this panel is not saying that the only issue are these statutes, nor that the Vergara lawsuits can actually improve all schools in California. And we're in a situation right now as a state where we have 2.5 million kids that can't read and write at grade level, and there are a number of issues that are the reasons why our schools aren't successful. Incredible diversity, a lot of poverty in the state is a real issue. It's harder, it's harder for a child in intense poverty with intense challenges, or at least more expensive maybe to educate than for my child. It's just kind of the reality of it. Not enough daycare for our young people. We have funding issues in the state. Kids aren't actually, in many cases, spending enough time in school. There are a whole number of issues that lead to us not having what we should have, which is a great school for every child in every neighborhood. That being said, I think it's our responsibility, any issue that we can change that can improve kids' lives and improve schools, we have to actually change it. And in this case, there's no question that a 2-year tenure system, and I agree with Joe, I support a longer tenure system, not no tenure system, but a 2-year tenure system is just not, it's not effective for kids because you end up having teachers that get tenure that shouldn't get it. A system that actually says all layoffs are done based on seniority only and not based on performance is a system that guarantees that some children will have a teacher that is less effective than a teacher who got laid off because of the structure. So I think it's just about how do we address every issue, this just being one of them, and by no means the only answer in terms of what we need to do to improve our schools. And thank you, by the way, for 37 years of forcing and of believing and focusing on kids.
I'm going to take a question from Manny, and because
Can I just interject one quick thing?
Very
It's a
quick.
crime to fire a teacher of the year
right.
because they haven't been there that long. That's just a terrible thing for the children that could have had this fabulously performing teacher.
Absolutely. Manny, and then I'll go over here.
Well, I think there have been a lot of positive developments with the litigation, with the awareness of by virtue of the example of charter schools and other experiments with choice in other states, not just California, with Green Dot and do the work that you've accomplished. But the teachers union as well, it's a battle for survival for them. They have a lot of huge war chests. They were able, there was one early success, the early 90s, as the result of the proposition of loss that provided for educational choice in California. It went down, it was outspent 18-1, but that created the first charter schools, the authorization, and the response. The Democrats feared that there would be no response and the initiative might win. I'm curious to ask, Marshall, you've been in the Treu for a long time, on the front lines in an alternative system, a system that is much, it's more like Uber than it is like dealing with the IRS. And I'd be curious, what is your sense of the recent proposal as far as having the funding impact, and how, what are the lessons that you've learned on the front lines of the charter school?
Yeah, and a couple thoughts. One thing I believe strongly is I think that the flexibility that charter schools have should be given to all public schools, traditional public schools. So I think one of the problems we're having, as somebody who's run a school system that was a charter school system that had flexibility from this huge, I mean, California had this book called the California Education Code. It's 2,300 pages. It's just filled with rules that are exhausting for principals and for teachers, and they're brutal. That the charter schools have flexibility from most of that. And so when people would talk about a charter versus traditional district, I would just say, let's just get the same flexibility to traditional districts where the dollars follow the student, where principals have much more flexibility to be successful, and when you're not just completely burdened by all these rules from the state. And I think by doing that, you would actually unlock an incredible amount of energy and creativity amongst teachers and principals and superintendents. There's not one superintendent in the state that I've talked to who says, I would love to have the same flexibility as charter schools to more effectively run my schools. And so I think that that's something that we can push to, and I think is possible, not today because of the political environment you mentioned, but not too far in the future. Like I came out of my campaign very optimistic. We ran against an incumbent supported by the most powerful force in California politics with an aggressive effort by the machine to keep that person in place. And we got 48% of the vote. And I think with a little more time, a little more money, would have actually put it over the top. And our coalition was Republican, Democrat, Independent, high poverty, high income, just a bunch of people who wanted to do better by kids. And so I actually think that it's going to still be a long push, but we're getting to the point where you have a majority of Californians who are ready to take action. And I think that charter schools have given a path in terms of with more flexibility from the government, with more responsibility or support and frankly respect to the educators, which is what I think that environment provides, that we can do better by our kids. It doesn't mean all charter schools are good, by the way, because if you can have a good governing structure, but if your principal isn't very good, if your principal's not in classrooms, if your teachers aren't actually working to get better every day, you're not going to have a great school, but at least gives us a better chance to be more successful. So I'm actually quite optimistic. A lot of work to be done, quite realistic about we got a status quo that's going to fight tooth and nail to keep power. And not that they're evil, they're used to a system that doesn't work, and the system has to change, as you mentioned. But man, we got 500,000 kids in charter schools. I saw some incredible public schools over the last year, and not just not just charters, even some traditional publics. Just some wonderful schools where you walk out of and say, California can be number one again. There's no question. But we got some real work to do. But I'll tell you, you get inspired every day by you look at what Julia's going through, and you're just like, hey, we can do this and we can make this happen. It was funny, I'm looking at the Macias' parent engagement. They're here, they're advocating, and Lucy's doing her homework over here in the front row, by the way, while we're at this thing, right? You talk about, what's possible, good parenting, and also, I think, good inspiration. So I had the luck of being inspired by so many people, and we're gonna get there because our kids deserve it and they can get there, and our educators deserve it too, frankly.
I think though that Manny Klausner is making an additional point, which is, well, I concur with everything Marshall's just said, that you can sometimes make advances at times when it might seem like you lost. For example, we might lose this appeal. But nonetheless, the fact that this has gone so far will mean that future politicians who were also scared by Marshall Tuck's very powerful campaign and the support he gathered against the establishment candidate, they're going to be scared. So just as charter schools came in for fear that vouchers, which are even more empowering for parents, or opportunity scholarships, if they had come in, then the special interests would have been threatened even further. So we may get additional flexibility out of, trying to have something maybe less than what we got in this great decision, but they want to maybe take the wind out of a future lawsuit that might again try this. So, and that if there were defects, let's say in this case, that a judge discovers, somebody might try again not having those defects. So they might try to make some changes anticipating that. So I think that the point that he's making, and we also see that charter schools have charter school effects. They can improve the surrounding public schools because they're challenged. They have to compete. Just as opportunity scholarships or vouchers have a so-called voucher effect. The other schools are worried about losing the kids exiting to go somewhere else. So there is, even dark clouds can have a silver lining. So keep fighting, everybody.
Absolutely. So we're going to take one final question, and then there'll be an opportunity to talk after the panel, and we're going to let Julia's mom, Evelyn, ask that question.
Thank you. I'd like to address what, no, I'd like to address what the teachers said in the back. I want to thank you also for all of your wonderful years of service, especially to special needs students. I want to share with you, we didn't really say that Julia has had a wonderful journey, and that she's had amazing teachers who, even when she's had ineffective teachers, have helped her. And second grade was really hard, but we had a great teacher who helped her through that process, and she was let go the next year because of LIFO. And she was really loved in the school. We get to fourth grade, she says, "Mom, I'm not learning." For a fourth grader to tell the parent, "Mom, I'm not learning," and I leave my job to go sit in the class and kind of figure out what's going on, and I realize she's not learning, and I talk to the teacher and I don't get solutions, and I talk to several people, and I have to move her when she's been at that school since kindergarten with all her friends, and she's getting ready to go to fifth grade because she doesn't know what she needs to know, and I know she's a year away from going to middle school. We get to another school, and she's got a phenomenal teacher who helps her catch up in another year and a half. And then he's let go, he's pink slipped. And then we get to sixth grade, and we get another ineffective teacher, and this is math. And we get to seventh grade, and we share the whole situation, and she's getting ready to go to high school, and the teacher says, I'll teach her, hold her back a year, because I heard that the teacher in 8th grade is failing students. So we hold her back in pre-algebra, gets to 8th grade, guess what? She gets that same teacher. So by now we realize what that teacher is about. We speak to the principal, and thank goodness for the principal. He gets Julia in another classroom with the chair of the math department. And she looks at Julia and she says, I don't know what the problem is. She's a great math student. But like Mr. Evers said, it takes a parent, it's not about poverty. Poverty is not the issue for us, but it's been so strenuous having every year to do what Julia said is like a lottery. Are we going to get an effective teacher? Are we not going to get an effective teacher? I believe that now Julia is in a phenomenal high school, and I believe that her middle school was a phenomenal school with amazing teachers. I mean, her three science teachers, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, inspired her. She wants to go into physics. And it's because of those amazing teachers. It's not poverty. Joe and I were teacher's assistants in one of the poorest schools,
one of the poorest districts when we were in college, and we saw amazing teachers do phenomenal things with these kids who were so poor, but we also saw the opposite. And I think too many times poverty can be an excuse, and I think we shouldn't get stuck in that. I think we really need to look at the hard facts, like Mr. Ever says, like Marshall says, like we've seen. We think scores are important because we've been able to see the ups and the downs in Julia according to the teacher that she's had, and we're not alone. We're thousands of parents strong, but I think we need to be better informed. I think we need to be more fearless. I think we need to listen to our children, and I think we need the unions to listen to us. This isn't a fight with the unions or the teachers. We love the teachers. We need the unions to work with us. So if you can talk about how you can see the unions working with us, I'd like to hear that.
Well, I think we're going to have that as a private conversation. I'm not sure that we can answer whether the unions will work with us, but I thank you so much. And I think the bottom line is it just shouldn't be this hard. It shouldn't be this difficult to find good schools for our kids. And we shouldn't, we pick things like insurance or our cell phones or our cars. These are things we spend a lot of money on, and it's so much easier. And then when it comes to education, we have to be constantly vigilant. And I don't think that vigilance is ever going to go away, but it should work more like other things. Education should, and we should have more choices, and we should be able to get through it easier. Thank you guys all so much for joining us tonight. And, I hope there's more food and drink out there, and please enjoy a few more minutes, and you can also talk to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.